This is Breakthroughs, a podcast from Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. I'm Erin Spain, editor of the monthly Breakthroughs newsletter. Today we're talking about dads, the evolution of fatherhood, and some important scientific findings about modern-day fatherhood that might surprise you. Joining me is someone who is not only a dad himself, he's a pediatrician and a scientist who's published dozens of papers about fatherhood.
My name is Craig Garfield. I'm an associate professor of pediatrics and medical social sciences at Northwestern's Feinberg School of Medicine and an attending physician at Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago.
Your life's work as a pediatrician revolves around helping children and the health of children, and specifically you spend a lot of time with preemies in the neonatal unit at Prentice Women's Hospital. How did you transition into studying dads?
Yeah, that's a good question. Children thrive when parents thrive, so if you can help parents be the best that they can be, most likely you're going to end up with the kids having the best outcome that they could ever possibly have. And I started getting an interest in fathers after residency. I had a baby during residency. My wife was a medical student, and we moved back here to Chicago for her to start her residency at Children's Memorial, which now is Lurie Children's. I'd finished 3 years of residency in pediatrics, but never really experienced the hands-on of being a parent. Yet so much of my advice affected mothers and fathers taking care of their kids. So knowing that my wife was going to be in her most intensive time of her life as an intern, I said, well, let me just be at home with him, and I'll stay at home and be a stay-at-home dad and see what this world of parenting is all about.
When was it when you were home with your little one?
It was 99 to 2000.
99, that was 18 years ago about.
That was a huge eye-opening experience for me. I went from, June 30th, the end of my residency, where I was senior in the house at Mass General Hospital, like the most senior resident in pediatrics. And I flew home, and the next day was on the playground with my son, all by myself as the only dad on the playground. And it opened up this incredible world to me over the next year. I was trying to find activities to do with him. So I looked for, what classes we might do together. And all the classes were called Mom and Tot classes.
Groups, yes.
So I called the Mom and Tot coordinator. I said, hey, are dads allowed at this class? And she said, yeah, I don't see why not. And it was fascinating about 6 months into that Mom and Tots class that a mom came up to me and very quietly said, we actually have a play group that meets on Thursdays if you wanted to join us.
Oh, you broke into the inner circle.
And I felt like I'd finally broken into the group, and I became close with all those women, all those moms. That really opened my eyes to what's going on here with fathers in health, in families, and what part can I play in this? And when we had been in Boston, we had a pediatrician who was a very well-respected pediatrician, and I would arrange my schedule to make it to the pediatrician's visits, and I would sit there and the pediatrician would pay no attention to me. I realized that if I was not getting any feedback from the healthcare system, most likely many other men weren't either. And I think what happens with men who are trying to figure out what their role is as they become a father, if you get no feedback from the healthcare system, the education system, then you just turn to places where you do get feedback, which typically is work, right? So then you get a paycheck. And so instead of being at home and being with your kid, which maybe is what you kind of want to do, society is sending you messages that, where you need to be is at work. So when I had finished this year at home with my son, I started a fellowship at the University of Chicago, a Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholars program, which was 2 years of research time to think about and study an issue. And I had originally was going to do it on violence prevention in the ER, and realized that this idea of fatherhood was really interesting and something that I wanted to study. So I spent those next 2 years working on projects looking at fatherhood and how fathers are involved in pediatrics. And that was really the start of the whole career trajectory.
Children with involved fathers do better.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about that?
There's a small but definitely growing body of literature on fathers that show that cognitively children who have involved fathers have better linguistic abilities. They have higher academic readiness and ultimately higher academic achievement. Socio-emotionally, they have better coping. They show more maturity and more pro-social behaviors and have secure attachments. And if you think about the job of a baby or a toddler, their job is to, from a secure base of attachment, explore the world. So if mom and dad are both involved, whether they're married or not, right? Because again, 40% of births are going to be unmarried, and almost whether or not they're cohabiting or not. So if they're living in the same house or not. Children who have involved fathers are actually going to feel more comfortable exploring their world, and that's how children learn, and that's how they know it's a safe world, and they can go away from the parents, play off on the corners of the playground, but know that they always have that safe attachment to come back down. And then children with involved fathers also have fewer risk behaviors such as truancy and substance abuse and stealing. So all these things combined really make a difference. When we started our research, we really wanted to look at our fathers there in pediatrics, right? That was kind of where we started with. We wanted to look at our fathers there. If they're there, what do they do? How do they impact children? How do children then impact fathers, which is a little bit of a twist on the equation, and then started to look at special populations and how you might approach those too. And so we did interviews with 35 couples in Chicago and Milwaukee, very in-depth interviews with them with the fathers actually, of how they are involved with their children, and then ask them not just the typical question, did you take your child to the doctor, which is usually how research has assessed fathers' involvement in health, but we really said, what are the ways that you're involved in the health of your child, and came up with a new survey tool that's more dynamic and more detailed about how fathers are involved, which include things like role modeling for the kid, healthy behaviors, arranging your life in such a way so that if the baby or the child needs to be at home,
if they're sick,
that you actually also have flexibility to make a change, and it's not just expected that the mom would necessarily. And I think a lot of this comes back to your question again of what dads are facing, of the fact that more graduate degrees are going to women, mm-hmm. right? And as more women get into the workplace and start to obtain higher salaries, it may become a very simple calculus for the family to say, you know what? She can get more money in the workplace. Dad, you step up your involvement at home. And my question always is, are dads ready to do that, right? Yeah. And do they have the role modeling for that? And one thing that I think is important to understand is that dad's involvement in childcare and in housework has doubled since 1965. So the lion's share of work is still being done by moms. Of course, we have to give them their shout out, but dads are starting to step it up too.
Well, modern day fatherhood here in 2018 probably looks pretty foreign to some of maybe the grandfathers or great-grandfathers out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even the way that if you think about our grandfathers and certainly our great-grandfathers would never have been in the delivery room when their baby was born, and now it's the rare dad who isn't there in the delivery room, whether he wants to be there or not, and whether the mom wants him there or not. But at every place, dads are expecting to be involved. Our research has shown that they go to the doctors with their kid, and they have their own unique questions that they want to ask. And they want to be involved in that baby's life at the very beginning of the after the baby's born. And my message really is that they're coming to the door. Let's open the door for them. Let's meet them at the door and not close it to them at the very beginning.
And how do you feel pediatricians are doing with that right now? Are they have changes been made where fathers are being a bit more welcomed in the pediatrician office?
I think so. I think more and more pediatricians are aware of the value of this extra player on the team, right? And I think pediatricians are learning how to engage dads and what dads are looking for. Dads generally are pretty, like many men, are problem solvers. So they may need more direct advice on what to do, right? So I talk a lot with dads, particularly when I'm in the neonatal intensive care unit, and I say, here's what you can do for your partner right now, and it might be helping with breastfeeding, which many dads are like, what that's not my job, right? But there are certain things you can do to help a mom around breastfeeding.
Can you talk about what your research has shown?
Sure.
Some of the mental challenges, physical challenges, relationship challenges that can take place once someone becomes a father.
Yeah. So in those interviews with the 35 dads in Chicago, Milwaukee, we asked some questions like, how did having a baby affect your life? How did having a child affect your life and your health behaviors? And the vast majority, 80% of them, said that they actually try and eat better now. They try and exercise more. They try and avoid risky situations too. They drink less. So I thought, well, this is really interesting coming from just 35, dads. I wonder what it would be like to look at these kind of issues in a bigger study and one that's followed over time. We found some data that had been tracking adolescents from high school all the way into their mid-30s. And we took this data and we broke all men into whether they were a father or not, and then if they were a father, whether they lived with a child or whether they didn't live with a child. And we asked the question, from a mental health perspective, was there a change in the men's mental health during the transition into fatherhood? We did some very sophisticated and complicated statistics to figure out how long the men had been fathers and when they transitioned into fatherhood. And what we found is that for those dads that actually are living in the house with the baby, that in the 5 years before they became a father, their depressive symptom scores, which were measured at 4 different times across this 20 years, were decreasing. And once they had their baby in the next 5 years, there was an increase in those depressive symptom scores. And that increase in the depressive symptom scores for the average participant in the study was about a 68% increase.
These were men who were living with their child, and they weren't depressed. And as a matter of fact, it was less likely that they were depressed until they had the child. Then they were at risk for depression.
They were at risk for depression. So if they were scoring really low on this depression scale that we have, then a 68% increase is not really going to bump them up into a worrisome area. But if they have some past mental health problems, if they were scoring high already on the depressive scale, a 68% increase may kick them into an area that they may be then at risk for depression and should really be seeing someone. So those first 5 years are really important years for children and the attachment that we talked about, and how the baby and the toddler needs to know that they have a good base from which they can then explore the world around them, and for the men themselves and the enjoyment that they get out of parenting as well.
So that's important to know, because we do have more screenings in place for mothers after the birth of a child, but now it sounds like fathers need that type of screening too.
Yeah, and the good news is that there are screens available. Even many of the same tools that we use for mothers can be used for fathers too. The issue becomes, and again, this is a nut that we have not cracked quite yet, is what do you do as a pediatrician when you find out that a mother is depressed, right? So there are a number of resources that are out there now to help pediatricians deal with mothers. For fathers, not so much. Right? And so that's something that I think the field needs to think about, is what do you do when you actually identify that dad's having a hard time with this transition into fatherhood? And that transition for both parents is hard. It's a loss of control. It's a loss of sleep. For many men, they are in kind of the work-family balance is very, very difficult, and we don't have a really comprehensive approach, as most other countries do, to family leave that can help men in this transition into fatherhood.
So you had an interesting study a few years ago with a headline that is a little funny about dad bods. But dad bods is a real thing when men have a baby. Oftentimes their BMI rises. Is that right?
Yeah. So we were looking at what the transition to fatherhood. What the effects of the transition to fatherhood might be on men. So we did the one study looking at mental health. And one of the things that you hear anecdotally is that dads end up, eating less healthy foods because there's a couple of leftover nuggets on your kid's plate, so you just take those. There's pizza crusts around the house, and you just start eating that. And you just might have different food in the house than if you were just living without children. So we looked at a sample of over 10,000 men, and we broke that sample. They had been studied for about 20 years, and at 4 different points in that 20-year time period, they had been weighed, and their BMI, their body mass index, had been calculated. And we looked at those men who were not fathers and compared them with men who were fathers and men who were fathers who lived with their babies and who didn't live with their children. And we looked at what happened to their BMI over that time period. And we controlled for the fact that everyone's BMI is going to go up anyways. We controlled for marriage. We controlled for all the things that you would think would be associated with changes in weight. So what we found is that for men who are fathers who do not live with their child, on average in this sample, they gain about 3.5 pounds after controlling for all other factors once they become a dad. Resident fathers, so those men who actually live with their children, gain on average about 4.5 pounds. And so what I love about this study is that we actually take anecdote, what people just talk about on the street, and say, yeah, this happened to me, and actually we're able to show that there is an association between becoming a father and gaining weight after you become a father. So what that really tells me is that the transition to fatherhood is a place that when you're looking at men's health, you could intervene. It could be a lever for change for these dads, and it's an important area for the baby, for the mother, but also for the dad himself.
Something else you're really interested in is using technology to help parents and dads take care of their children. Everyone's using apps. They're on their phones. They have their baby monitors on their phones. There's different ways that we're using technology. Tell me about some of the latest tools that you've created to use technology to help parents, specifically dads.
Yeah, so we realized that when you start looking at populations of fathers, one of the most terrified populations of fathers are fathers in the neonatal intensive care unit. And that comes, it's terrifying for mothers as well, right, for the whole family. This is not necessarily the delivery or the baby that they were expecting, right? These are often very little babies that are very medically fragile and vulnerable. And for dads, it's a little bit worse. Dads, even with a full-term big baby, fear that they can break this baby. And now you have a baby who's, much smaller, and instead of 40 weeks of gestation is only 25, 26 weeks of gestation, or even 30, but definitely not what they had expected. And these babies stay in the NICU for from weeks to even months or longer, compared to just a 2-day stop in the hospital before going home with a full-term baby. So there's a lot of information that parents can benefit from at this particular place in the hospital. It's a very unique setting. And so we realized that one of the things that we thought that parents could benefit from was that period when they're getting ready to go home and then actually going home. So we developed the first version of the app that focused on the discharge process. So as soon as the baby graduated from incubator and into the regular air that we all breathe and the regular temperature that we all are in, that's usually about 2 weeks before they're going to go home. And so we started our intervention at that point, and we did a randomized trial. So half the people in the sample got the phone and half the people just got the usual care. And we compared what the benefit of using the app was. And what we found in that study was that the parents that got the phones with the app on it actually were more confident in taking care of their baby after they took the baby home, more prepared for discharge, and if they used the app more, they had a shorter length of stay. So based on that, those findings, which were really remarkable, we talked to all the parents that finished the study and said, what would be more useful in this app? And they all said, we wish we had this app when we got admitted to the NICU, right? We got the app when we were going home because that was the study, but they wish they had it at admission. So based on our findings and based on this feedback, we went and now are testing an app, a smartphone app in the NICU called NICU to Home, which goes from admission all the way through to discharge. And we've kind of tailored and personalized what information is going out to each person, each baby and each parent based on their unique clinical situation. We've been funded by Friends Apprentice to develop this, and we're rolling it out at Prentice Women's Hospital in the NICU. And there's a number of features that we built specifically for dads, and we call dads out on this. We have content that says, welcome to the NICU, Dad. We've done a number of videos and still photos that include dads and moms, because previously much of the research had focused just on moms and their experience in the NICU. And this comes from studies that we did looking at stress in the NICU, where we actually collected salivary hormones from moms and dads in the NICU from being in the NICU to going home. So we looked at stress levels from discharge into going home for babies in the NICU. And what we found, which was remarkable because we didn't really expect this, is that moms actually have high levels of stress based on their salivary cortisol levels while in the NICU. And when they go home, they remain high. Dads actually have high levels of stress while in the NICU. And when they go home, it actually increases. And no one had looked at this during the transition to home. But it's remarkable because what that we hypothesize is that these dads are actually maintaining the status quo, right? That the baby's taken care of in the NICU. They often have a routine where typically mom may be there during the day, dad's at work trying to get things finished up because the baby's getting ready to go home, and then they meet kind of at the bedside at the end of the day. Now all of a sudden they're at home and dad is trying to take care of the baby and be a good partner with his wife. His wife is now home as well, and she has to deal with the stress of being home with the baby now, and he's trying to balance work as well. And take care of himself. When you think about where that mom is going to get her primary support from, it's from that dad, right? So if we didn't know that dad was more stressed out, then he may not be at his best in terms of helping that mom. So if we can identify and prepare and help that dad with that stress of going home, then he might be a better support for the mom in the stressful period of going home as well.
What other changes are on the horizon right now for dads?
Yeah, so there are about 66 million men who are fathers in the United States. So it's a tremendous population. And 40% of those births are to unmarried couples. And we're starting to understand the differences in those populations of men. And I think a lot of the work in fatherhood now is understanding subpopulations of fathers. This falls kind of on the fact that men are not just being looked at as breadwinners in the family, but are actually looking at participants in raising that child, and that they're looking to not be a male mother, but they're actually looking to be an engaged father. And fatherhood and the way fathers interact with their kids is different than that of mothers. For example, you can just imagine when you're walking down the street, that fathers might describe the scene in front of them differently than mothers might, right? There are different things they might call out in the stereotypical way. Maybe a dad would describe kind of, look at the trucks and look at this building that's being built. And a mom might describe, look at these beautiful flowers and look at this tree. And all that language goes to help the child develop more vocabulary and a better receptive and expressive language when moms and dads are both contributing to that particular language. And dads themselves actually have been really increasing their involvement in childcare and in housework.
What has changed in society during that time that now there's this more of an emphasis on fatherhood and fathers being involved?
Yeah, I think it's part of it is cultural, in that if you look at who appears on People magazine, for example, you'll see Mark Zuckerberg with his baby, right? And Mark Zuckerberg took time away from work. Now, granted, he has lots of other resources, right? But nonetheless, he's setting an example. You have Prince William, right? He's a prince, and yet you see him very closely involved with Kate and their children. So much so you see it that there actually is a new word that came in the Super Bowl in 2015 when there was so much advertising that happened that involved fathers, that a word came into our lexicon called dadvertising, which describes how ads on TV or even on radio focus on fathers. And there are ads for cars, there are ads for soap and shampoo, there's ads for, there's a really funny one for toilet paper, like all these ways that we know dads are involved. But Madison Avenue figured out what's happening on Main Street. And they figured out that actually what needs to happen is you need to feature dads in this. They may not be the consumers who are buying it, but it completes the picture of real families that are out there.
Many dads here in Chicago might recognize you. You mentioned that you teach a class at Prentice Women's Hospital. For a while now, about 6 years, you've taught a class only for new dads, no moms allowed. Why did you decide to start teaching this class? And tell me a little bit about what the class is like.
Sure. So I think dads are really have questions that they want to ask, but it may not be the best environment for them to ask them in a group setting with other moms there who are really experiencing the physical manifestations of pregnancy. So it's a tough sell for a dad, sitting next to a mom who's, 30 weeks pregnant and can't sleep on her stomach and can't eat sushi and can't drink alcohol, to then say, well, you know what, raise his hand and say, it's really hard for me too, because I'm very nervous about this baby, or what do I need to know? So we thought there was a great opportunity for just having dads in the room. And it's a really pretty marvelous group of men when the class gets going, because we sit around the table and I start by asking them kind of, what are your hopes and fears going into this? And we talk about that. And men start to realize, you know what, I'm not alone, right? That other people have these same concerns, or there are other things that they had not thought about that now they are really looking forward to or concerned about. And then we talk about again, what their superpower might be, how they can get involved with helping mom with breastfeeding, how they can get involved with kangaroo care, which is putting the baby just on their skin and doing skin to skin, which really is a beautiful thing. It soothes the baby, and most of the time it soothes the parent also, and everybody ends up falling asleep on the couch.
Right. Just like nice low heart rate.
Yeah, and we see it in the NICU. We use it in the NICU all the time. The other way that I think the class is helpful is it helps dad who are, again, looking for, tell me directly what to do. And I give very kind of explicit directions both in the class and in the NICU of, your job in breastfeeding is to make sure that the baby is latches on at the right level, and that might involve bringing pillows to help the mom get the baby in the right position. Your job is to help mom stay hydrated, because there's a lot of liquid that you're giving that baby. And your job is to be baby Uber, to take that baby from wherever the baby's sleeping and bring it to the mom so that the mom can feed and then bring the baby back. And I think dads benefit from knowing there's something that they can do, because otherwise they get in this mindset of, I don't know what I'm doing, so let me just. It's all a mystery, and it's some secret thing that all moms know. And to be honest, not all moms know it either, right? But they are the ones who are going to be providing the breast milk, so dads can help by kind of assisting in the logistics of getting the baby there and getting the baby on.
And this class is a little intense. It's a couple hours long. There's a couple dozen men in the room.
Yeah, there's 20 dads each session, and we don't take a break, because I feel like, again, this is all the information that I, as a pediatrician, would want to impart to a dad, but there's just not enough time when you're actually seeing patients, and no one really leaves, right? We don't take a break. Very few people get up. It's at the end of a day, work day for all of us, but they stay. They ask really insightful questions about what's going on, and we talk about kind of the research that's involved with. The upcoming research that's involved in dads, and place dads kind of in a cultural moment here, and then talk a lot about what happens with labor and delivery, but talk beyond that, because labor and delivery is kind of one moment when that baby's born, and you suddenly get to see this child for the first time, which is a magical moment for many dads. But then you have 18 years still to learn about that kid, and so I spend a lot of time talking about that and how to think about balancing work and family, how to help the family in general, and what you can do when that new baby comes home.